Hello, and welcome to Dev Radio. We're talking more about the Cloud Adoption Framework today here with Wayne Meyer, Kevin Rowlandson from Microsoft, and James Anderton from HashiCorp. Kevin is going to get us started by deploying the enterprise scale foundation for the landing zone with Terraform. Did I get that right, Kevin? Is that what we're doing?
You did, and thank you for the quick introduction, Matt.
Okay. So there's your screen.
Thank you. So we're going to go into a brief introduction to what enterprise scale is, but first let's step into a quick demo and just show how quick and easy this can be. Enterprise scale as a reference architecture consists of many hundreds of resources. What we've tried to do with the Terraform module is try to break that down into reusable components that customers can deploy into their environments using as little code as possible. So here we see a diagram representing the core components that we deploy through the module, and this is what we're going to quickly demonstrate now. We then have an additional section for management, which we'll show later on today. And just to kind of get started, this is just the README from our module. I'm just going to copy this code. I'm going to switch over to the Azure portal, where I've got a Cloud Shell session already open. I'm going to go into a folder which I've pre-created and that's empty. I'm going to launch the code editor within here, copy the content in. I'm going to save it, just call it main.tf, just as a starting point. And then from that point, I'm just going to run a couple of commands to get us started. So I'm going to initialize the environment, which will go away and download the latest version of the module. And then the next step I'm going to do, I'm just going to go straight to a Terraform apply. I'm going to auto approve it so it can run on through. And I'm going to set some parallelism on this to get things running a little quicker for us today. But that is basically as simple as it is. And just to quickly show that we're not cheating on anything, this is my environment here at the moment, where you can see we've just got the tenant root group management group and a single subscription. And this is the environment that we're deploying into now. And it's as simple as that, Matt. So back over to you.
Okay, and I'll hand it over to you, Wayne.
Well, fantastic. That's good. And so we kind of wanted to kick this off, at least so things are running, and then we'll kind of walk through and do a little bit of a positioning on where this all fits in. As we've done in the previous sessions, we're going to cover off the Cloud Adoption Framework, just give you a quick sense of, or at least cover off what the actual framework is, where this particular module fits in. We have done previous sessions on the adoption framework where we've spoken about enterprise scale, deploying through the different through the interface and through the portal. Jeff Mitchell kind of walked us through that. It was great. That was a great session. We've also done other sessions where we've kind of given some more of the theory around what enterprise scale is. And so if you go to aka.ms/CAF series, CAF series, you'll see we've got six videos in there. The last one is the actual module that we did deploying, and then session action number 2 was actually the one focused on just talking a little bit about what enterprise scale actually is. I'm glad that we've kind of got this kicked off with Kevin and James, because I think this is one that we're seeing customers asking a lot of questions around, like, hey, I'm using Terraform today. How do I go and stand up my environment? How do I get my basic kind of Azure management groups and structure kind of established? And I think this is a really good addition to kind of that CI/CD and their infrastructure as code that we can go out and run. I've physically been involved with specific customers in doing this. And what's great is that, we had, I think it was literally 2 days worth of conversation with the customer, and it took them 45 minutes to an hour to get everything prepped and up and running. And so we had this, their environment stood up using Terraform CI/CD. They were over the moon that it was really that simple to deploy. To talk a little bit about the adoption framework, we really kind of think about this in 3 ways. We've got this business focus where we've spoken about strategy and planning, what the importance of building out that plan, having a cloud adoption plan. Once you know what your backlog of work is and you understand all the assets and all the work that you're going to actually drive and deliver into your Azure environment, we need to establish that platform. The platform is really around that landing zone and making sure we have some governance guardrails from the outset. Enterprise scale is our series of reference architectures that we have today. These reference architectures are built with the right, best practices in mind, where we can actually from the outset deploy at least a minimal viable product for governance. So, thinking about locations and thinking about types of resources, thinking about things like types of security elements that we put in place, making sure that we are monitoring and logging in the right way. We have a common set of tools set up. We also enable the environment that if you are looking to do things like hybrid management and hybrid environments using Arc, that is established. There's principles and rules applied to do things like security monitoring using, Azure Security Center and Sentinel. And so when we think about enterprise scale, it helps us kind of remove some of the hardcore decision making that we know really holds customers up. We've got these reference architectures and this best practice in place that we can actually go and deploy as code. Now, customers will look at deploying these things in different ways. As I said, we've got enterprise scale using just the portal experience, connection into, with GitHub Actions. But the Terraform module, which we're walking you through today, is absolutely brilliant, and one that we get, as I said before, kind of many customers are asking us questions around, hey, I've got Terraform today because I'm using this as my platform for CI/CD and doing my infrastructure as code. How do I use enterprise scale? And so you'll see how we can kind of build that. As you move down the path within the adoption framework, the workloads are really the areas that we've spent some time on talking about before, which is patterns and practices and repeatable IP around, hey, how do I do migration, or how do I do some sort of innovation scenario or data, a data project. We've built some of these into various Azure DevOps templates, but there's lots of rich guidance that we've actually built into the adoption framework itself, that if you go in and have a look at under the adopt pillar of the adoption framework, which I'll show you in a minute, you've got a series of areas of guidance around how do we do Linux migrations, or how do we do kind of SQL migrations, or kind of thinking about taking those open source databases that we might have, how do we get those up into Azure, or right down to even doing things like, hey, we want to make sure that we are building out some sort of analytics platform, or embracing various devices and doing things like IoT and so on. We've got all of that documented for you as well. The last kind of two parts of the adoption framework are really around management and having the right guidance around architecting those applications and those workloads in the right way, and providing guidance and best practices on how to do things, to build for cost efficiency, build environments that are reliable, secure, and can be operated in the right way. The well-architected methodology is absolutely phenomenal. We've got some really good assessments within this space. This is an area that we continue to invest time and resources into. Building it, being able to go out and do those assessments, getting recommendations on how to improve your applications, and then the architecture and design of those applications is absolutely key. Kind of thinking a little bit about enterprise scale for a minute. I think we have covered this off in previous sessions, but really is our best practice and an architecture-driven approach to kind of the implementation of your landing zone. Now, landing zone is kind of matrix, right? You're going to have that all up kind of foundational platform that you stand up. So think about your connectivity, your management, your identity, making sure they have the right structure to management groups where your subscriptions reside. But then you can also have more kind of tactical landing zones, which are going to be focused on specific types of workloads or specific types of applications. That we call these construction sets. And so you'll have things like, hey, I've got an analytics construction set, which I may need to kind of deploy into, or a WVD environment, or an AKS environment, or even an SAP environment. And so when you think about your landing zone, what we're going to be building today is that all-up foundational environment and the all-up platform, but then making sure that we then tee up for later on down the line, where you can actually start to bring some of these construction sets in, because you may have a very specific requirement to go and stand up something like an SAP environment. We've got code and we've got a reference architecture to be able to go and drop in. What we've tried to do within enterprise scale is actually provide a design that meets the bulk of customers. We know that there's going to be certain decision points that we think that customers need to make once. We've tried to help make those decisions, providing you guidance on what are the best practices, The whole point of building out enterprise scale is to help drive that velocity. This is proven. It's built on a number of large-scale migration projects. It's built on a number of customer engagements. We continue to take feedback, and we continue to build that in. The other really interesting thing here is that this is aligned to kind of engineering principles and focus and future. And so as the platform and as the engineering environment continues, we continue to evolve, this will continue to be updated as well. And then I think the last piece around this is making this prescriptive. And this idea of being able to say, hey, when you want to stand up your environment, whether it be a greenfield, whether it be a brownfield environment, you can actually use enterprise scale to stand up. And this, you might have an existing environment today that is running, that has got workloads in it. We can actually stand enterprise scale up in parallel and on side. And you'll probably see even in Kevin's scenario today, like he's got an environment that he's now standing up on the side, and it's going to start building. And so you can apply this, the enterprise scale principles. Think about this as being this, maybe it's an evolution of what you've been building over previously that you just don't feel is quite up to par. Once this new enterprise scale environment has been landed and deployed, hey, we can now start moving subscriptions and workloads across into it, so it picks up these new rules and processes and policies and so on. And so from an IT operations perspective, hey, your teams are now managing that infrastructure and those policies as code and the platform as code. You've got your developers being able to build into these environments. I think we've got a good, well-rounded, well-grounded kind of environment that is meeting those design principles that have been set out. We've actually gone out and we've built out 4 key reference architectures from a foundation perspective to get you up and going. I think the last time we spoke, there were probably only 3 of these. We had enterprise scale foundation, we had this hub and spoke, we had virtual WAN. There is a new reference architecture that's just landed, which is enterprise scale for small organizations. And so think about this as being foundation plus some level of networking and connectivity that has been built in there as well. Each of these specific reference architectures are available in GitHub. You've got the code that's there, or you can do a straight up deploy to Azure. We're going to be spending some time today, as we've mentioned already, on the Terraform module that's available. It stands up exactly the same kind of reference architecture, the same structure that we have. Obviously, the steps to get there are slightly different. I'm a complete newbie to Terraform, so I'm going to be the guy that's asking all these newbie questions to Kevin and James. But as we go through this, you'll see that it is pretty straightforward. As I say, sitting through a couple of customer engagements, going through this, it is super easy, and it's great to see this stuff operational and running once it gets deployed. So with that, I'm going to quickly just show you where to find this in the adoption framework itself. We've got some. I'm going to give you a quick view in. Let's go to the adoption framework environment. aka.ms/adopt. When you jump into the environment, go down to explore the framework, and let's jump into the docs platform. You'll see that under the landing zones, starting with enterprise scale, here's your Terraform module for all things that you need. I have put a link into the slides as well, so that'll take you directly to the GitHub repo. But this will give you kind of a step-by-step and some guidance and some background around the Terraform module. Go and spend some time taking a read through. It's a pretty easy read, giving you some examples around the various examples that are there, the code that's available, and then as you want to kind of get into it, there is the GitHub wiki. Jump into that. You'll go and find the code and follow the steps that Kevin's going to kind of walk you through. So feel free to continue to use this, and we will continue to update. If you've got any questions or any feedback, drop it into the comments window, or get hold of us on the Dev Radio channel, and we'll be able to kind of help out and fulfill those needs. So let me jump back to you, Kevin, and see if that build has actually got to a point. And we can finish up.
Yeah, thank you. And great introduction and overview of enterprise scale, so thank you. So we're nearly there. I don't know if you can see my screen again. In fact, literally as we flicked on there, it has just gone to apply complete. So as you can see, in that time that we've just been doing the introduction to talk about what is enterprise scale, we have now deployed the foundations for enterprise scale. Actually, if we had done the management landing zone at the same time, it would have actually completed in the same time. because that usually completes in parallel with the management groups being put into place. But you can see here, just from that process there, we've added 189 new resources into our environment. So let's have a look in the environment and see if we can now actually see this in practice. And this is where we have to wait for the refresh of the portal.
Nice new logo.
Okay, indeed. So here we can see now we've got an enterprise scale management group within the hierarchy. So the subscription is still where it was before, but what we've now built out is the base hierarchy. If you compare this to the reference architecture that we've got published on the MS Docs site, you'll see there's a lot of kind of familiar names here. For now, within the Terraform module, what we've tried to really focus on is the platform elements. So the specific examples for landing zones of online, SAP, and Corp, we've omitted from the module. They're perfectly easy to add, but rather than kind of pushing that onto a customer from day one, we've left that open. And what we've tried to do is really put in the bare minimum of what we consider our prescriptive setup. If we actually start to drill into here, we can start to see what else is done, because obviously 189 resources, there are not 189 management groups here. So what we've actually been doing in the background, we've been actually pulling in a whole set of policies, and these policies are actually added into the module dynamically on a sort of fairly frequent automated update process. We pull them from the native deploy to Azure templates, which are used for the native ARM experience that just deploys everything through the portal. We actually pull them into the module, and then we make them part of the internal library. As part of the module functionality, we use a thing called an archetype definition, which is basically a way of defining the scope of what resources to deploy against a given management group. And here, looking at the root management group, what we've got here is a set of policies that you can see have been assigned, and they're still awaiting to actually assess for compliance. If I actually drill down into specifically the definitions now, and let's filter them down to just the custom ones. What we can start to see here now is actually a list of all the different policies and initiatives that we've put into the environment. Now, going back to the whole thing around prescriptive architecture, what we're really trying to do here is encourage customers to create this custom route. And within that custom route, this becomes the point from which all resources sit under. Two reasons for that really is, one, it allows us to have somewhere that we deploy everything to that doesn't necessarily long-term require full ownership over the entire tenant. The other reason as well, of course, is the fact that you want to be able to raise exceptions. So if you want to be able to stand up another management group at a different scope, or pull a subscription completely out of the enterprise scale architecture and compliance, you can do that still. But within here, we've got all of the policies, definitions, and initiatives. And this makes sure that they're all available at any scope. So we're not necessarily assigning them all here, but what we're doing is we're making them available for assignment. And if I just scroll down through here, you can kind of get an idea for some of the examples. So controls relating to network access, controls relating to enforcing SSL connection settings. We've got some rules relating to subnet management, so enforcing things like putting an NSG on a subnet or a user-defined route. And some other ones which are kind of more core capabilities, so things like turning on Azure Defender and controlling the Azure Defender settings for Azure Security Center to ensure that you've got better compliance over your resources. And all of this kind of comes together to be able to help build up your environment and make it sort of highly governed. If we now sort of just look at the assignments, you'll see at the top level here, we've created a handful of assignments. Now, these are more to do with the broader visibility. So think visibility before control. What we're trying to do here is really turn on diagnostic settings and make sure that whatever's going on in your environment, all of that information is getting pulled down and stored into a central log analytics workspace. If we now actually go back to the hierarchy and we go a little further down, and I'm going to look specifically at management because this is the area that we're going to look to modify shortly. you'll see here we actually have a different set of assignments. So we've not only inherited the assignments that have come from our enterprise scale root management group, but we've also got this additional one here for deploying log analytics. And this is actually here in the normal enterprise scale. We do a lot of policy-driven deployment. But obviously Terraform, we have a slightly different approach with this. And I'd say this is possibly more of a cultural difference. But Terraform, we're a lot more used to the idea that we actually deploy and manage the resources with Terraform and as true infrastructure as code, rather than letting policy do the work for us. So what we've tried to do within the Terraform module is actually bring those two pieces together. So the module is designed to really ensure that the resources that we deploy actually are compliant with the policy. So there's actually a bit of a handshake there in the background within the module that actually ensures that those two things match up. And we'll demonstrate that in a little bit. So I guess on that point, let's go back to the Cloud Shell. And we will modify the deployment. And we'll actually now set up some of the management resources. And while that's loading, I'll just go into here. And at the moment, I just have a set of generic resource groups that don't have anything specific to enterprise scale yet. Sorry, a bit difficult to see at this resolution. Okay, see, there's various different resource groups in here, but these are just my sort of general testing environment. And this also gives us an opportunity to now actually look at the code that I deployed. So if we look into the main.tf, a lot of this configuration is actually fairly standard setup. So we've defined a block for our required providers, just to set that our minimum version we want is 2.41 of the Azure RM provider. This is actually our minimum supported version at the moment. That's based on the various different resources that we deploy and how we've configured them. You can't actually go any further back than that, otherwise you will get errors. But some of these enforcements are also built into the module as well. So if you didn't configure this, the module actually helps enforce that for you. We've set up a fairly standard provider here, which obviously in the current context is just using my login. So it will be running under my current user credentials. As part of the model, this is something we use quite consistently within our examples, but I actually use the client configuration for the current provider session. And that's quite useful for us because that allows us to pull out values that are not dependent on running Terraform apply. So we can pull out things like subscription ID and tenant ID and actually use them as inputs into the module without having to do a scoped deployment. We've got two variables defined, just one to set a root ID and a root name. This is what we would kind of recommend as the minimum starting point for a customer. Fundamentally, root ID keys into pretty much every single resource you create. So if you change this particular value, you're going to basically redeploy absolutely everything this module creates, because everything is in one way or another pinned back to that value. So if we're ever going to talk to customers and talk about what is the one thing you want to get right from day one, that is probably the most important bit for you to consider. The root name, this is just to set a more friendly name on the actual the customer root management group, and that can be whatever you want within the limits of the validation. And on that point, it's probably also just worth mentioning some of the limits that we put in place on the module. We often get asked the question, why are you constraining it to these limits when this resource type supports this naming convention? And the simple answer is about ensuring standards across multiple resources. Because we use this value and we join it with other things and we actually do other stuff with these values, we need to make sure that we've got a set of rules that are much stricter than you would usually consider on those individual resources, so that we can then take those and easily reuse them across multiple resource types within the module. And when it comes to the actual module itself, this is the module block doing the declaration. So you can see it's literally as simple as declaring the source from the Terraform registry with the version, setting the root parent ID. Now this is the only mandatory setting, you could actually deploy it with just these 3 lines in the block. And the purpose of this is just to give absolute certainty of where you want to scope the deployment. Now, usually we'd recommend doing it against the tenant ID, which represents the tenant root group. But if for whatever reason the customer wants to be able to actually deploy it at a different scope, you can actually set this to the value of any existing management group that already exists, as long as you're not going to exceed the depth limits of 6 management groups within Azure. And then obviously we just set in the root ID and root name. So there's the starting point. Before we move on to making a few edits to this, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, I think just the thing that, and we're hoping we can kind of go through this maybe towards the end again, is just the setup and where we initially went to. I think just it will be good for us, for folk, just to kind of see. So maybe we'll go back and just kind of show that. I love the fact that you've kind of pointed out these, you know, specific areas of things that you should change and things that, you know, have those decisions on. I think that's going to be critical. Making sure that as we build through this, we don't have any specific gaps. And then I think the point at the end around the management groups and the different levels, and you know, that's the depth of your management group structure. So being able to deploy this into any existing management group is great, but be aware of, you know, of that six level depth. I think is a really good call out. I have got some other things that I want to kind of talk about a little bit about later on, but let's keep going. Unless James, you've got anything that's top of mind? And James, yeah, we're lip reading right now.
This has been a great walkthrough so far.
Cool. Thanks, Bob.
Cool. Well, on that note, then let's go to your first question then about actually looking back at what I've actually done here and where I've pulled this from. So for us, all paths start at the Terraform registry. You know, this was a really critical part of what we wanted to set out and do here. And actually, in the early days of when we first started discussing this, we had a few internal conversations about how we wanted to approach this. And we actually initially looked at whether to write this as a module or to even actually develop this as a provider. And the reason we were making those considerations is the vision for this was really about building a data model. And obviously, to build a data model and work with the data model, it's much easier to do in a full programming language. But what we didn't want to do was create something that then conflicted with the Azure RM provider. We wanted something that complemented that. We're also thinking of it from the lens of open source contribution. So one thing we really wanted to do was to be in a position that, you know, while we are trying to provide a prescriptive solution specifically for enterprise scale, this is an open source project. All the source code is fully publicly available. And actually, we want to encourage public contributions into this as well. So, you know, in that regard, we've actually kind of gone down the module approach to help with that, because we feel there are going to be more people out there who feel a bit more comfortable reading and understanding Terraform code rather than Go. It also helped us in terms of development because we had more skills within our team that could actually write Terraform code as well. Go was a bit more limiting for us in that regard. And it's also then a bit easier to actually understand. So people who want to consume the module can kind of really understand what the module's doing if they choose to look into it. And of course, that can all be done through GitHub. Now, in terms of where I've copied that code from, admittedly from the GitHub page, but essentially within the home page of this, we've got the diagrams explaining what we're actually building with the module and what the options are. This is all very high-level information, just to kind of get you started and give you a high-level overview. We've got this simple example within usage. So this is the example I've just run today. But we do have more examples. And actually, to do that, we turn to our wiki. So actually, if I go to our examples page on the wiki, which is linked down here, but we've also got links further up, this actually takes us to our GitHub repository, and specifically to the wiki, where we have an examples page. And within here, what we've tried to do is we're trying to build up a library of examples, starting off with some level 100 basic examples, which are kind of like the really easy get starting examples. And then we go through some level 200s, which are doing a bit more customization on the module. And then level 300 is really starting to get into some of the more complex scenarios that you might want to cover. And obviously over time, as we get more requests on the issues log and we kind of start looking at what it is that customers are actually trying to do with the module, what we're going to try and do is we're actually going to pull all that information into we're tracking all of these issues, we're flagging them as documentation requests, we're prioritizing them, and then we're going to actually build that into the wiki as well in the future. So yeah, I mean, on that note, if there is anything that you feel you want additional information on, please click on that issues link, click raise issue, and provide us with your requests.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, I love the fact that, you know, we're looking for people who are doing stuff and saying, hey, maybe I've got a gap here, or I've got something that is not quite meeting my needs, and we can continue to flesh that out. So we'll drop those links in.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, because one of the limitations we've obviously got with the module is it's very difficult for us to get any telemetry on this and to understand how customers are using it and what they actually want to achieve with it. So for us, the issues really is a really important communication channel for us to be able to understand what our customers want from the module.
Hey, Kevin, just something that's top of mind for me right now. So I'm fairly familiar with the CAF enterprise scale reference architectures. How do we see, and you know, I've seen the Terraform kind of piece in play, and obviously what you're walking through. We get to a very similar outcome at the end of the day with a hierarchy and the management groups and your subscriptions and so on. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship between enterprise scale and Terraform, and do these run on two separate paths? How do they potentially come together? Help us understand that relationship for a sec.
So the real intent behind the module is to just create a Terraform version of enterprise scale. So today, like I said, we're building out the core resource hierarchy. We provide the ability to do the management landing zone specifically. We have plans in place at the moment. I'm currently working on one for connectivity. So it's really about taking Terraform and building a solution for that enables customers to accelerate their journey to deploying enterprise scale.
So we should have parity irrespective of what you're using. So whether you choose to go down the path of ARM templates using kind of the enterprise scale modules, or whether you're using kind of Terraform, hey, it doesn't really matter. The parity is there.
Correct. That's right. And from a team philosophy point of view, you know, actually one of the things that we talk about quite a lot with our customers is the thing that we really care about. Our passion is actually the architecture and the recommendations behind that. So if you actually look at our documentation on the cloud adoption framework, one of our real kind of focus areas is the critical design areas. Yeah, that is our real focus, and those are the bits that we feel passionate about. How you actually deploy that, you know, that's less important to us. You know, we want to make that journey as painless for you as possible. And whether you choose to go down the route of using ARM-based templates, build your own solution, go with a third-party provider solution from one of our partners, or the Terraform module, you know, actually to us, what matters is that the end result is customer success.
Yeah, cool. So I've heard this other term, the Terraform cloud. And I don't know, James, I don't know if this is something that you want to weigh in on, or Kevin, if you kind of have a perspective on it. Like where and how should I think about that in what we're building here?
So I'll start and then I'll pass it off to Kevin. So Terraform Cloud is our opinionated and managed platform for teams to be able to collaborate when building and deploying Terraform. So today you've got Terraform, and you saw how he was able to do it on a single person scale with just the runtime on the CLI. And Terraform Cloud is the managed collaborative version of that. So we have the VCS driven workflow, the version controlled system driven workflow, where you can commit your code, you know, and you and your team can work in that repo. And then as you commit your code, as it gets approved, then it sends a webhook over to Terraform Cloud. Terraform Cloud picks it up, runs the init and the plan and the apply for you. And that's just the base, you know, the base model. We have different tiers as well. So, you know, if you have the governance tier, we can also then apply some Sentinel policies to be able to provide guardrails for those developer teams. They don't want to have to worry about the corporate IT security and all that. They want to just write their code and move on and deploy. And so you can have those applied, for them in place. So that's kind of our opinionated management platform.
Got you. And so, Kevin, and then so for you, what you're deploying today, I guess anybody could pick that up, right? From, I guess, what I'm hearing that that James was saying is that this is it's based on the CLI. It's just available to anybody. Like, there weren't any prereqs that were required in order for you to be able to go and use this, right?
No, the prereqs are quite simple on this, and this was something that we tried to do with the module. And it actually shaped a lot of the decisions that we made, because during initial development, and I continue to do this today for my personal testing when I'm making changes to the module, I actually use Terraform Cloud myself. My whole reference implementation is run through Terraform Cloud. And one of the benefits this gave me was the ability to remove a dependency on my machine as to which versions I had installed. I can actually use Terraform Cloud to set some of that stuff up. I can securely store all of my secrets within there. So things like my credentials to the environment, I can store within there. But I can also start storing things like some of the values for things like the root ID and the root name. So it just makes it a lot easier for us to get up and get started quickly. Some of the VCS integration points as well are really useful for us, because it allows us to push out a new commit to our Git repository, and then that will auto build. We can then use the Terraform Cloud to actually take things like the approval workflow, which allows me to not only push those changes out quite seamlessly, but also to actually review them first before they actually go out to the environment. So yeah, we see a lot of benefits from it. Also, just thinking about the module design, it allowed us to kind of really focus on what it is that would work that keeps the module simple. So actually, we've managed to achieve what we've done to date without anything in the way of third-party additional providers or tooling or anything like that. And working on Terraform Cloud was a really useful way to kind of help shape that, because we were able to work within the limits of what Terraform Cloud could support, giving us greater confidence that no matter where you use this module, you should be good to go with literally a base install of the Terraform executable.
Cool. That's super cool.
One other great feature with Terraform Cloud is you saw that he's storing his module in the public module registry. Terraform Cloud also has the ability to create private module registries inside of your organization. So teams that have additional restrictions and regulations and don't necessarily want to just grab public modules, they can also clone these modules into their registry and use Sentinel to be able to lock it down so you can only pull modules from your private registry. So it works really well.
Gotcha. Cool. That's neat. All righty, Kevin, what else have you got for us?
Cool. So I'm just going to try and copy a few bits across here and hopefully not break things too much.
Hey, this is we love to break things.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to set up some basics for getting started with actually configuring some of the additional resources. And you'll guess from my formatting that I did have an extra line in this block. But what I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to specify a subscription ID for management, which I'm going to just take the subscription ID from the current context. Now, this is because I have a single subscription, but actually you can configure this module in such a way that you can deploy it kind of in a decomposed structure. One of the real key design points of this was the data model. And I keep mentioning the data model, so I should probably elaborate a bit more on this. We take a very basic set of inputs from the user, and there are some that are very simple and there are some that are a bit more complex. But ultimately, we've built a data model that allows us to have a built-in library of templates, and the customer can then bring their own library of templates. And that's really what's given us the flexibility to make the module sort of not just customizable, but fully extensible. So we often get asked all sorts of questions around, oh, can I change this? And I think so far there's not a single thing that a customer has asked for to change that we've not been able to change with the current design of the module. It's just knowing how to do that. So actually, it's more a case of uncovering the documentation requirements behind it rather than the technical requirements. But yeah, when we take all the defaults, certain things get pulled in. So the subscription ID, what this is going to do, this is not only going to identify this subscription ID as being the management landing zone, it's going to then use this as the subscription to target for deploying in the management resources because it is the current subscription. But it's also going to take that ID and it's going to place it into the management group configuration for the management area. So it will move this into the right management group within the hierarchy. It will also build up all the data model for things like the policies. So we'll actually see some of the policies get updated here as well. And what we'll do is we'll go from having a placeholder value of all zeros within the log analytics workspace ID to actually having the valid subscription ID for our management subscription. And that's really where some of the heavy lifting is done within the module to make the customer life a lot easier, because they no longer have to worry about making sure that the right settings are being pushed into those policy assignments, because the module will now do that for you for the built-in policies that have a relationship to this. So I'm just going to save that. I'm going to do Terraform apply again. I will set parallelism again, just because I know there's going to be a few resources changed on this. I won't auto approve it this time though, because I just want to kind of quickly review what this change is actually going to do.
Quick question whilst you're going through this, Kevin. And this is I get this question from a number of customers, both on the enterprise scale side and then also on this, as you were saying, hey, there's 189 resources or so that get deployed. Is there a way or an easy way for customers to understand what the potential financial impact is of what gets deployed? So like, what are billable services versus what are not?
Great question. Not an easy or simple answer. I guess the shortest version of it is if you go with all defaults, the cost is generally pretty low unless you start layering in lots of resources. So by default, we go with a lot of configuration defaults that match to our recommendations. So I think the main area to watch out for is things like Azure Defender. So our recommendation is to turn on the standard profile for Azure Defender. In itself, that doesn't actually cost anything. It only costs things once you remediate resources that Azure Defender are then actually configured for. So in itself, the module doesn't deploy much that costs anything. I mean, management groups don't have a cost. Policies, role assignments don't have a cost. They're just part of the the core offering of the platform. But yeah, if you put this in and then start bringing subscriptions in and then you have resources going into those subscriptions, then you can start seeing some costs occur.
Cool.
To chime in here, shameless plug for Terraform Cloud. We do have a tier where we have cost analysis and cost management. And so having run this, I actually can say that he's right. It doesn't really cost anything. I've got a couple of empty subscriptions that I was able to apply the landing zones to and also assign my subscriptions to those management groups. And I think I paid a whole 39 cents.
Well, there we go. Great answer.
Great. So what we've got going on here, if I could just quickly talk about here, you see some policy assignments are being recreated here. These are all policy assignments where actually the subscription ID plays a critical part in one of the input parameters. Now, obviously, this is a let's call it a limitation of policy assignments. If we change the parameter values of a policy assignment, we have to destroy it and recreate it. And that's what's happening here. The policy assignment in itself, because these are all deployed policies, it's not actually going to affect your governance at the point that you're making these changes. So, in theory, no one should be able to bypass a compliance rule just because you're running an update at this point. But what this is doing is making sure that those policy assignments are up to date and they're going to be fully aligned with the specific log analytics workspace that we're deploying here. But it's much more than log analytics workspace. We're actually layering in the automation account and linking those two together. And then we're layering in some solution packs as well for Azure Monitor, which allow you to provide some additional governance over things like, VM updates or change management. And we've got a couple in there specifically around Sentinel as well. So all that stuff gets turned on for you as part of this setup. And if you want to change any of it, that's absolutely possible as well. So there's a lot of granular control, specifically within the management configuration settings. You can kind of fine tune a lot of the core settings. What we've tried to do is align that with the same experience you get through the deploy to Azure experience. But if you want to do more heavy customization, you can do that. And this is where things like the custom library come in, which is documented within the wiki. Right, those resources have deployed. So let's see if we can now see some of this. Okay, so here we can see I've now got a new resource group here called ES-MGMT. This is the resource group we've just created, and here you can see the configuration of all the defaults that we've layered in. So here you can see we've got a log analytics workspace called ES-LA, got the automation account here. If we actually go in and look at the log analytics, sometimes this takes a few moments to actually update with the link, right? But we're already there. So you can see now it's got the link associated with the new ES automation account as well. And as well as that, we've kind of turned on a lot of the solutions as well. So you can actually go into here and start looking at some of the things that have been set up in preparation for you. So here we've got things like update management. Again, this is just taking a little while to update, but once this is all updated, this should all be configured for you. And that kind of gets you started on that side. If we just go back to the management groups quickly, and I'll go down to the management group. You'll see now the subscription is showing as under the management group, whereas previously it was still under tenant root group. And so that changed. That's one of the things that's applied. And if I go to policy and assignments, and I look at the assignment for deploy log analytics, you'll see it has settings in here that match all of the pieces that we've got deployed there. So the automation account is called ES automation. The resource group called ES-MGMT. So you see how by using the module and deploying these things together, what you actually get is that synergy between both policy and the resources that you've deployed, which ensures that once you've actually done a compliance scan on this particular policy, then you'll get a nice green tick telling you that you're compliant. I think just to show another one as well, hopefully get this at the right scope. Let's go for the root level. And again, into assignments. So we're looking at things like deploy VM monitoring. And you'll see here now, previously this would have had a placeholder value in it. I perhaps should have shown this as part of the earlier demo, but you see now you've got a valid value in here specifically for the log analytics workspace that we've just deployed. But what we've also tried to do is make sure as part of the customization, if you want to provide an existing one, because we realize there's a lot of brownfield solutions out there. If you want to bring an existing log analytics workspace into the solution, we actually support providing this value as part of that. And then that will ensure policy gets updated with those correct values.
Yeah, this is super, Kevin. I just, look at customers that have actually had to build this from the ground up, right? And so you can just see, the 5, 7 things that you've shown, like some of those decision points are just so onerous that it's just taking customers so long to be able to make those decisions. And like being able to have this kind of coded up built in as a reference architecture that says, hey, here, just go, if you run this and land this and put the right, these couple of key variables in, gets everything deployed for you, from solution packs to policies. I think that is huge. That is really, really powerful. Now, this doesn't mean like we'll still have CIS compliant or NIST compliant or some other kind of regulatory meeting, some sort of regulatory frame. That's something we need to address after the fact, right? These are based on what we believe are core best practices. But you can now go and layer on some of those other NIST or CIS-based policies over and above. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I mean, I think how we try to look at this is these are a set of policies that we recommend everybody should have.
Yeah.
And then when you start talking about things like CIS compliance or HIPAA, high trust, PCI compliance, all of these are things that the customer can come in and add on later. And, that's a really good segue into talking about some of the customization and extensibility of the module. Because what we actually do is we provide the ability to go and add on your own definitions. So we talk about creating custom archetypes, but what you can actually do, you can also extend existing ones as well. So if I just go to this example, what we can do is we can actually use a library within your module where you can define additional files for extensions and exclusions. And this allows you to actually modify the policies that are assigned by an out-the-box archetype. So in this particular example, what we're trying to do is extend the ES landing zones archetype definition to add a policy assignment for deny resource locations. And it's as simple as defining this template within a folder within your root module, and then you just declare that as part of your main.tf. And in that case, it's just setting the library path. So you just tell it where the library is, and the module's got the logic in it to actually go and find that, do a name match on the fact that this is extend _ ES _ landing zones, and it will know what to do with that and how to do that extension. Similarly, if you want to create your own completely custom archetype definitions, you can put them in the library, but also policy assignments, policy definitions, role definitions, and policy initiatives are all supported within here as well. And that allows you to really sort of start customizing your environment and building it up using a common framework, if you like, for deploying not only enterprise scale, but your broader management around policy and governance.
That's really cool. That's really, really cool.
So one question I had about this whole thing was, I've had several customers ask me, there's a module for cloud adoption framework, and then there's this enterprise scale Terraform landing zone module. Can you tell me, like, what's the difference and what size company should use which one?
Oh, that last bit's a great part of the question. So the cloud adoption framework module is a broader kind of module covering a sort of a broader scope of parts of Azure and deploying Azure under the cloud adoption framework design. It also provides a kind of a recommended reference way of running Terraform as well. So it's got a built-in capability called Rover, which basically is kind of a CI/CD pipeline ready Docker container that contains everything you need to kind of edit, set up, and run your deployments. It actually uses a hierarchy-based approach. So the team that developed it put a lot of time and effort into making sure that you could layer in the various different layers of the architecture. So they start off at a base level where they set up your kind of CI/CD environment with a DevOps capability. They then move on to start layering in things like the landing zones. And they actually use this module, the enterprise scale module, as part of that deployment as well. So you can actually deploy enterprise scale using the cloud adoption framework module. It provides a lot more, but it's also a very prescriptive way of running Terraform. So for customers wanting to do enterprise scale, they have a choice. And I wouldn't say it's so much to do with the size of the organization, but more a kind of a decision around how they want to run and operate Terraform.
Okay. Yeah, that makes great sense, actually. So a much more prescriptive way of doing it. It's kind of like us with the difference between the open source and Terraform Cloud. Okay, that makes great sense.
Yeah, I like the distinction there, Kevin, of not around the size of the organization versus the operations. Because even you could be a really small entity, but your operations could be very mature. And so it's not necessarily that org size. And ultimately, that's where I think a lot of the things that I talk about when we talk the cloud adoption framework is helping customers change the way that they operate and change the way that they think. Cloud is that model. It's not hey, I'm going to take some VMs and throw it up there. Like, whilst that is a great solution, and it is a very valid kind of a real scenario for many customers, there's other things that we can do, and how do we manage and optimize and streamline our environment through the way that we do modern operations and modern management.
So one other question that my customer's been asking me is, how does this work with the brownfield? How do we integrate this when we already have subscriptions and management groups?
Another fantastic question. So the enterprise scale architecture is designed to work alongside brownfield. It doesn't have to be a fully greenfield environment. What we try to do, though, is actually look at the migration approach rather than the deployment. So both the native and the Terraform approach are both designed in such a way that you can actually deploy this alongside any existing infrastructure. Because of the way management groups work, until you move something under a management group, it's not affected by the management group. So we talked earlier a bit about the depth limits. When we talk about management group limits, I believe the current maximum for management groups in a tenant is something like 10,000 management groups. So unless you have a very, very large number of management groups, you're not going to run into any problems with limits. So what we try to do is encourage customers to actually deploy this alongside whatever they have today, scope it to the tenant root group as per the recommendation, and then start looking at the policies. You can do an evaluation of what you've got today in your current environment and look at a way of migrating that across into the new hierarchy. And then once you're comfortable that you've got all the right policies in the right places and you've planned out your landing zones, then what you can start doing is start taking a subscription migration approach. And this is really just taking a subscription that's in one management group and associating it with a new management group. And theoretically speaking, the only impact should be a change in the policy profile. Obviously, most policies only apply enforcement at the time that you try to make a change. So if you're introducing a new policy that's maybe going to deny a resource that already exists, well, if that resource already exists, it can't deny it. So you're not going to stop things working, but what you're going to start doing is raising red flags on things that are non-compliant. And then you can start using some of the newer capabilities within policy assignments like exemptions, so that if you have specific resources that you're going to want to exempt from the policy, you can then do that on a case-by-case basis. But it shouldn't have an impact on running resources.
That's a great clarification, because I know that's a lot of concern that I get a lot of the times with customers will say, hey, I'm moving things in. What are these policies going to do? What's going to break? And so that's another kind of just, I guess, another roadblock that we have to kind of overcome as we go through these things.
Yeah. And the main one would be sort of where we've got deploy if not exist policies, just ensuring that there's no kind of conflicts on resources. But I think the likelihood of that is pretty slim in most organizations. And most of that stuff that you can work around. And to be honest, if there is a conflict, then chances are you've already deployed it. So deploy if not exist is not going to kick in.
Yeah.
Speaking about deploy if not exist, is there plans for automating, creating, and assigning subscriptions? Because I know that's kind of been a sticky point with some of my customers.
Do you mean as part of a subscription factory, or in terms of when you're moving subscriptions, having the DINE policy kick in?
So you have to assign a subscription to your management groups or landing zones for these policies to be applied. But say I want to create a new subscription and apply it to the landing zone all at the same time. Is there plans to be able to create subscriptions on the fly?
Okay, yeah. So not within the module. And the reason for that is the subscription creation process is something we feel kind of has its own unique set of challenges. we see that really as an input into this module. So, when we think about Terraform itself, that can create subscriptions. I'd have to double check the exact setting options for that, but you can, with the subscription API, put a subscription straight into a target management group. It doesn't have to go into the default, which obviously usually is tenant root group, but you can configure that within your tenant to be a different management group. The only thing you have to watch out for, though, is because this module is enforcing governance, one critical part of that governance enforcement is the fact that the subscription should be under the right management group for it to inherit the right policies. We also enforce the placement of subscriptions in the right location. So if you start dropping new subscriptions into the management group hierarchy without making the module aware that those changes have happened, then you'll find that the module, the next time it runs, will try to pull all those subscriptions back out and send them back to their default home. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So I know we're just about at time. Kevin, is there anything else, any final kind of thoughts or anything else that you wanted to show before we wrap up? I do want to make sure that we take an opportunity just to do a quick recap on what we've seen and what we've shown, so that folks can kind of go away and kind of know what the next steps are.
Sure. I mean, in terms of sort of just general, the one thing I would ask is, take a look at the module on the registry, have a little bit of a look through it, give it a try. As James has mentioned, the actual cost of running this is very low. And we can run this in an existing tenant alongside other sort of resources without having any impact on those resources. So give it a try, let us know what you think. Please provide any feedback via the issues. And if you've got any questions, then reach out to us there as well.
Cool. And one last question, do we have any training kind of on a docs on the Learn platform around this, or is there any other training that the HashiCorp team have actually put up that can actually help, that somebody can go and walk through?
From a Microsoft side, I don't think we've got anything lined up for that yet. I think it's a great point. I think sort of DMS Learn is something that we should start considering and put that onto our plans. For now, we're putting everything within the wiki.
Great.
So yeah, just take a look at the documentation we've got there, and if there's anything you have a specific question on, then to the issues.
Cool. I think Kevin, James, anything from your side on the HashiCorp side, any kind of key training or learning material that folk can actually go and take a look at?
There's quite a bit of material on the learning site about how to integrate modules and how to just get started writing Terraform. There's nothing specific to the enterprise scale module, but it's pretty easy to take our module integration tutorial and use this.
Cool. I think go ahead.
So I was going to say something else just worth mentioning, not so much training material, but we are actually in the process of developing an accelerator repository. So it's going to be a template repository that will sit alongside the module repository, and it will have a reference implementation in it, one which you can either run locally from your machine, but we're also going to use a lot of the lessons we've learned from our test framework. Because actually within the module, we do a lot of automated testing within CI/CD pipelines using a combination of GitHub Action and Azure pipelines. So we're going to take some of that learning to give a reference implementation for how to run Terraform in a pipeline on GitHub or ADO. But that will also give a much better insight into some of the customization and how we would recommend setting up your root module to deploy enterprise scale. And that's going to include doing things like aliased providers, so you can actually do the whole multi-subscription deployment. And that should hopefully make things a little easier to kind of get started at a more advanced level then.
Yeah, that'll be a big deal. I know a lot of people will be interested in that part.
Fantastic. So we've really covered a lot of ground today, from kind of setting up, showing kind of the initial build, updates, applying kind of updates and changes. Obviously, all of this was done through Cloud Shell. You could, I think it's obvious to say that this could all be done through kind of VS Code or something as well. So I think really, really powerful kind of walkthrough. Thank you both. With that, I'm going to kind of hand you back to Matt, who can do a quick closeout. I know it's aka.ms/CAF series. We'll keep pushing people there. Matt, any final thoughts from your side?
No, this has been super helpful stuff. Kevin, really appreciate you taking the time to show us. James, thank you for joining, and hope to have you back. And can't wait to see the next thing that you have to show us. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, see ya.